So, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining in. Nice to see that a few people have joined. Hello, Geeta, and hello, Buddha Ruchi. And hello to everyone who is there but hasn't typed in the chat. So, this morning we are going to start with the Namo Tassa as usual. And feel free to join in if you like. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, this week, the monastics and also the lay people at Empty Cloud Monastery are on retreat, and I am the one who's taking care of the channel. So for those of you who join in regularly, you probably have seen me yesterday also, and you will see me again tonight and tomorrow, because everyone else is hopefully doing intensive meditation practice. And as I was preparing for this week, I assumed that I would be having 4 time slots. In the end, I ended up only having 3 this morning, this evening, and tomorrow morning, because we got another guest speaker. But I didn't want to change my topic. My topic actually needs 4 time slots because we have 4 role models that we want to discuss. But we'll just do the 4th one at some other time. And I decided to stick with this topic anyway. So today and for the rest of this week, we are going to talk about role models. And role models are, of course, extremely important for the practice. So the Buddha regularly recommended that we study and we learn from people who are more advanced on the path. Basically, that's the whole purpose of having a sangha, or having the fourfold community of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, and laywomen, so that we can associate with other practitioners who are more advanced on the path and who can guide us a little bit and who can also inspire us. And when we have people that are somewhat similar to us, that we can identify with a little bit, but that are more advanced on the path, then it just seems a lot more feasible to us that we will also be able to develop on the path and to develop those qualities that those more advanced practitioners have. And if we don't have that, if we are all alone, we don't have a role model, it's much, much more difficult to see that the path actually works and to have the faith and the conviction that we can also develop in a similar way. So the Buddha famously said that spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life. So when Ananda came to the Buddha and said, spiritual friendship is half of the holy life, the Buddha said, no, that's wrong. Spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life. For that reason, it's very important to have those spiritual friends, to have those practitioners who are more advanced on the path, so that we have somebody we can emulate and somebody we can aspire to becoming similar to them in the future. And for some people, especially in the modern times and especially in Western countries, that can be quite challenging because many of us don't have a sangha close by. Maybe there is no monastery close by. Maybe you're practicing at home in your own houses. And especially now with the pandemic, it's difficult to get together in groups and difficult to meet all these inspiring modern practitioners. And so the Buddha recommended that we actually study the lives of the people who were living at the Buddha's time, especially his chief disciples. And so by studying their lives and seeing how they lived, how they practiced, and how they developed, we can be inspired and try to emulate their lives and imitate the things that they did in order to develop our own practice. And as I just mentioned, the Buddha founded the 4 assemblies: bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, and laywomen. And he recommended that when we look for role models, we look for somebody within the same group as we are. So for example, if you're a layman, you could find role models among other laymen. If you're a laywoman, you could find role models among other laywomen. And for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the same. And the reason for that is that they live in a fairly similar conditions to ourselves. So if they can make it, if they can practice in their daily life, then it's much more feasible for you to practice in a similar way, rather than looking for practice advice or for looking for role models among the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis if you're a lay person, because bhikkhus and bhikkhunis have a fairly different lifestyle. So it will be difficult to fully practice in the same way. But if we have role models among lay people, then that should be much easier to practice in a very similar way. And so the first sutta we are going to read this morning is in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fourth, Sutta number 176, so 4.176. And that's the sutta where the Buddha recommends the role models for the different, for the 4 assemblies, the different groups of the 4 assemblies. And I've put a link in the live chat, and I've also put a link in the description box. Hopefully you'll be able to find that, because I know there was a little bit of a confusion in the beginning. And I will be reading from Bhante Sujato's translation. So this sutta is called Aspiration, and it goes as follows. Mendicants, a faithful monk would rightly aspire. May I be like Sariputta and Moggallana. These are a standard and a measure for my monk disciples, that is, Sariputta and Moggallana. A faithful nun would rightly aspire. May I be like the nuns Khema and Upalavanna. These are a standard and a measure for my nun disciples, that is, the nuns Khema and Upalavanna. A faithful layman would rightly aspire. May I be like the householder Chitta and Hattaka of Alavi. These are a standard and a measure for my male lay disciples, that is, the householder Chitta and Hattaka of Alavi. A faithful laywoman would rightly aspire. May I be like the laywoman Khujjuttara and Vilukantaki Nanda's mother. These are a standard and a measure for my female lay disciples, that is, the laywoman Khujjuttara and Vilukantaki Nanda's mother. So here we see that the Buddha, for each category of the 4 groups, here appointed 2 chief disciples. And I think for the monks, these are very famous. Obviously, Sariputta and Moggallana, I'm assuming that everybody has heard of them. And I'm hoping that everybody has also heard of the 2 female bhikkhuni chief disciples, Khema and Upalavanna. I decided not to give a talk on Sariputta and Moggallana because they're so famous. And I think it's not necessary to talk about Khema and Upalavanna because I think most of you will know I'm doing this series on the ancient bhikkhunis on Tuesdays, and we had sessions on Khema and Upalavanna. We've gone in a lot of detail, so if you missed that, the videos are on the channel. You can watch them there. And so for this series of talks, we will really focus on the lay people, because I think they are not quite as well known as the bhikkhu and bhikkhuni disciples. So today we are going to talk about Khujjuttara, and then today in the evening we will talk about Nanda's mother, and tomorrow morning about Chitta, the householder, and then the next time, whenever I get another time slot to talk on the channel, then we will talk about Hattaka of Alavi. So that is my plan. And one thing I want to acknowledge, though, before we move on, is that obviously what we see here is a very binary gender model. So with very clearly defined, sort of groups, the men and the women, and there isn't really anything in between. So of course, that really doesn't acknowledge the reality that there are actually people who don't properly fit into a binary model. So non-binary people, intersex people, also transgender people. And I think it's unfortunate that they are not mentioned in this sutta, but we do have a lot of stories about them actually, also being there. Just the other day, a few weeks ago, I came across a very, very beautiful story of a Chinese nun, and that Chinese nun lived in the, I think, 4th century CE, and she was described as an outstanding nun, as a very highly respected and very highly accomplished nun. And the way she was described, it was very clear that she is genderqueer, that maybe she was non-binary or maybe she was intersex. It wasn't quite clear from the text, but it was a very, very interesting story that I came across. So I just want to acknowledge that those kind of role models also exist. And if you're interested, we can read her story some other time. So let me know in the chat if you want to have a session about her as well. And then we can look at those more genderqueer people as well at some point, if that interests you. But for this series of 4 talks, because I'm focusing on this sutta, unfortunately, we're not going to talk about genderqueer people, but I want to acknowledge that obviously they also exist in the text. So today we are talking about Khujjuttara, and first of all, the name Khujjuttara, her name actually is Uttara. Uttara is the actual name of this laywoman, and Khujjuttara means Uttara, the humpback. So she had a physical disability. She was humpbacked, and I think that is also something that is very, very important to acknowledge, that we have a lot of stories about people with physical disabilities who were outstanding practitioners. And nowadays it's sometimes thought that people who have physical disabilities, they have bad karma, so they shouldn't practice the path because they can't attain anything anyway because their karma is so bad, and that's entirely wrong. It's absolutely not the way that we as Buddhists should think. We have so many stories about people with disabilities. We have stories about a blind monk becoming an arahant. We have stories about a person with dwarfism becoming an arahant, and both of them becoming very, very outstanding disciples. And here the foremost female lay disciple is also someone with a bodily disability. So I feel like this is very important to acknowledge. And there's literally no reason whatsoever in the Buddhist texts to justify discrimination based on disabilities. So I find it extremely inspiring that the Buddha actually named a disabled person as one of the foremost lay women. One thing that makes it a little bit difficult for us to study Khujjuttara's life is that, as usual, women are not well represented in the canon. The canon is a document that focuses very, very strongly on the male perspective. And so unfortunately, we do not even have a single sutta in which Khujjuttara features prominently. So we don't even have a single sutta that tells that where she appears and where there's an incident from her life or any kind of story about her. So for that, we have to turn to the commentary. I'm just going to retell the story, but she has a very inspiring story. And after that, we are going to read 2 other suttas that have a connection to her, as we will see in a minute. And so Khujjuttara was actually the servant of a queen. The queen was called Samavati. And Samavati was one of 3 queens of the king of the Vangsa kingdom, King Udena of the Vangsa kingdom, and his capital was Kosambi. So they were living at Kosambi, which is a very famous city in the Buddha's time. And she was the chief queen, and there were 2 other queens. And Samavati herself, the queen, also was one of the very foremost disciples of the Buddha, lay disciples of the Buddha. So we have all these lists of both male and female lay disciples that are outstanding in one quality. And Samavati was the lay woman who was foremost among those lay practitioners who were practicing metta meditation. So she was the most mettaful person among the lay women in the Buddha's time. And so she had this servant, Khujjuttara, and at that time, Khujjuttara's job was to go out daily and to buy flowers to decorate the palace. And so Samavati would give her 8 coins every day to buy flowers. And at that point, Khujjuttara wasn't Buddhist at all yet. And so what she would do is she would buy flowers for 4 coins and just keep 4 coins for herself. So every day she would actually steal those 4 coins. But one day when she was going to the florist shop, the Buddha was coming to that same florist shop as well, because he had been invited by the owner to give a Dhamma talk there. And as Khujjuttara came, she was invited also to listen to the talk. And as she was listening to the talk on the spot, the first time she came in contact with the Dhamma, she attained stream entry. So she had a very, very outstanding wisdom quality. And that is another thing that is very, very interesting for the chief disciples, for these pairs of chief disciples, is that it seems that of those pairs, there always seems to be one that has a dominant wisdom quality, and the other one seems to have a dominant samadhi quality. So this pair of vipassana and samatha that we also see in practice, in the meditation practice, seems to also be something that is replicated in the chief lay disciple, the chief monastic and lay disciples. So for example, we know that Sariputta was the one foremost in wisdom, Moggallana was the one foremost in psychic powers, and psychic powers obviously are based on having very strong samadhi. And the same for the Bhikkhunis. Khema was the foremost in wisdom, Upalavanna was the one foremost in psychic powers and strong samadhi. And for the lay women, that seems to be very, very similar. So Khujjuttara seems to be the one who has very strong wisdom and was therefore able to break through to the Dhamma the first time that she actually heard a talk, because she had so much wisdom that she could deeply understand the teaching. And the second lay woman, Nandamata, whom we are talking about this evening, she had very, very deep samadhi and psychic powers. And for the layman, it's not quite as obvious, but I think we can still see the same pattern play out. And we will talk about that more tomorrow when we talk about the layman. So this sort of I don't want to call it a division, but this, like between vipassana and samatha, this we also see this in the practitioners. And that's also very important for us as practitioners to know which of the 2 faculties is our dominant faculty. Is it wisdom or is it samadhi? Because if we rely on our dominant faculty to practice, then obviously the practice will be much easier. And if we choose meditation practices that align with our character and with our abilities, then it should be easier for us to make progress on the path. And we can also pick the role model here that is more aligned with our own abilities. So anyway, Khujjuttara was obviously very wise. In the list of the outstanding lay disciples, she is also the one who is the foremost among those lay disciples, lay women who have heard much. So she was very, very learned. And that's a wisdom quality. So Khujjuttara became a stream enterer, and obviously at that point, on that day, she spent all the 8 coins on buying flowers, because once she's a stream enterer, obviously her sila is perfected, and she definitely is no longer interested in stealing anything. So she stopped stealing those 4 coins. And she brought back a huge amount of flowers, twice the amount that she usually brings back. So Queen Samavati asked her where all the flowers are coming from and how she got the money to buy so many flowers. And so Khujjuttara explained to her what had happened. And the Queen Samavati was extremely impressed that she confessed the whole thing, and also that she was able to attain stream entry. And then Queen Samavati praised her very much, and she asked her to give the teaching that Khujjuttara had just heard from the Buddha to the Queen and to her 500 palace ladies. And because Khujjuttara had this really outstanding memory, she was actually similar to Ananda in her abilities to remember Dhamma teachings after hearing them only once. So she was able to repeat the entire discourse to Samavati and to her 500 palace ladies, and then Samavati and her 500 palace ladies also attained stream entry. So Khujjuttara was able to help 500 other women to attain stream entry on that day. And then they were obviously all very grateful, and they honored her very much. And from that day onwards, Samavati, the queen, treated her like it was her mother, because she was so grateful to her to have brought the Dhamma to her. And from that day on, Khujjuttara's daily task was no longer to buy flowers, but her daily task was to go to the monastery and listen to the Buddha's teaching. And then, because she was able to memorize that, to bring it back to the palace and to teach the other palace ladies and the queen. Because the queen and the palace ladies were not allowed to go out on their own without the king. And the king obviously wasn't that interested. So they were actually confined to the palace, but Khujjuttara as a servant could always go out. And so she always brought the Dhamma back to the queen. And at some point, unfortunately, the queen and all her palace ladies died. And this is the only instance that we actually find in the early suttas of Queen Samavati. And this whole story complex being mentioned in an early sutta. Or the rest is from a commentary. And at some point, one of the other queens, the other two queens, got very jealous of Samavati, because Samavati was the chief queen. And so she locked her and the palace ladies in a building and set fire to the building, and they all died. And the Buddha saw that happening with his divine eye, with his clairvoyance. And he commented on their passing and said, well, among Samavati and the 500 palace ladies, there's nobody who is an ordinary person. All of them are at least stream enterers, and many of them are once returners and non-returners already. So this incident is recorded in a text called the Udana 7.10, if you want to look it up. This is the only instance of that whole story being found in an early source. So anyway, Khujjuttara was not present when this tragic event happened. She survived. And she actually even survived the Buddha's own parinibbana. She lived on a long time after the Buddha was no longer around. And the interesting thing about Khujjuttara also is that since she had memorized so many teachings from the Buddha, she had this own collection of teachings in her head, basically. And just after the Buddha had passed away, the monks convened a council called the First Council. And the purpose of this council was to collect all the teachings of the Buddha and to provide an authentic version of the teachings that everybody agrees on. So if later on other people come and claim the Buddha has taught that or something else, then there is an authentic version of teachings that we can compare to, and that way we can know what the Buddha actually taught and what he didn't. And at some point later, Khujjuttara found out that all the suttas that she had in her head weren't actually collected at the First Council, because the monks didn't know them. They seem to have forgotten about them. So it was Khujjuttara, the lay woman, who passed on those teachings to the monks, and then the monks learned them, and then they were incorporated into the canon at a later time. So this collection of teachings is called the Itivuttaka. So these are clearly early suttas, but for some reason they were not collected at the First Council because the monks didn't know them. So it is thanks to this lay woman, this really outstanding chief disciple of the Buddha, that we have those beautiful suttas. And the Itivuttaka is a collection of 112 suttas. And many of those suttas do not have parallels in other collections in the canon, so they're really very unique. And we would have lost them if not for Khujjuttara and for her passing them on to the monks. So this is an instance where a laywoman actually was teaching the monks. And it's only thanks to that laywoman that we have all these suttas. And so I thought it would be really a fitting tribute to Khujjuttara if we read a few of those suttas today, this morning. I think I've selected 2 suttas that don't have parallels elsewhere and that I think are very beautiful. They're also quite short, so we can read them this morning and think of Khujjuttara, because thanks to her we have those suttas. And the first one I want to read with you is number 83, Itivuttaka number 83. And this is called the 5 warning signs. There should be a link in the description box, and there's also a link in the live chat if you want to read along. So the sutta begins. This was said by the Buddha, the perfected one. That is what I heard. So from the start, we see that this is a very, very unusual sutta. Normal suttas begin with, thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying in such and such a place, and there he addressed the monks, bhikkhus, and the bhikkhus say, Venerable Sir, and then the Buddha says, listen and attend closely, I will speak, and the monks say yes, and then the Buddha gives a talk. So this opening here is very, very different from the usual formula. And as I mentioned, that is because it was not collected by the monks at the first council, so it wasn't standardized in the same way. This is another indication, a formal indication in the text itself, that this sutta was transmitted outside of the first council at first. That's why it has this unusual opening verse or opening statement. Because this is a feature that probably Khujjuttara introduced, this opening. So this is an opening we find in all the Itivuttaka suttas, but we don't find anywhere else. And the Buddha says, mendicants. So obviously the Buddha here is talking to the bhikkhus and probably also the bhikkhunis. But as I mentioned, the bhikkhus forgot about these suttas. So these suttas are not given specifically to Khujjuttara. Khujjuttara was just there when the suttas were spoken, like in general to the assembly, whoever was there. So the Buddha says, mendicants, when a god is due to pass away from the realm of the gods, 5 warning signs appear. Their flower garlands wither, their clothes become soiled, they sweat from the armpits, their physical appearance deteriorates, and they no longer delight in their heavenly throne. So here we have the example of a deva, a god, about to pass away, so their lifespan has come to an end. And then there are 5 signs that appear, and their flowers wither. So normally, of course, in the heaven realms, flowers don't wither. Everything stays nice and beautiful at all times. And the clothes become soiled, so that's also obviously not something that usually happens in the heaven realm. Everything is nice and clean, and they sweat. So again, this is not something that normally happens to bodies in the heaven realm. They don't become uncomfortable, and their physical appearance deteriorates. So in heaven realms, usually you should be beautiful. But here now, when you start to become less beautiful, then that's a sign that you're going to pass away, and they no longer feel the happiness, the delight that they should feel in a heavenly dwelling. So these are signs that their lifespan is coming to an end. And then the other gods see that, and when the other gods know that that god is due to pass away, they wish them well in 3 ways. Sir, may you go from here to a good place. When you have gone to a good place, may you be blessed with good fortune. When you have been blessed with good fortune, may you become well-grounded. When he said this, so he is the Buddha here, when the Buddha said this, one of the mendicants said to the Buddha, Sir, what do the gods reckon to be going to a good place? What do they reckon to be blessed with good fortune? What do they reckon to become well-grounded? So now the bhikkhu is asking, what does that actually mean for the gods? What would the gods think of as a good destination for rebirth? And the Buddha says, it is human existence, mendicant, that the gods reckon to be going to a good place. So I think this first statement, I think this is very, very interesting, because there are so many people out there who wish to be reborn in a heavenly realm. People, especially in Buddhism, we encounter them a lot. People making merit, not really wanting to do very deep practice in this life, but making merit in order to be reborn in a heavenly realm. And if you actually achieve that and become reborn in a heavenly realm, then your aspiration is to be reborn as a human being. So basically, it's like a loop going around and around, and whatever you don't have, that you wish for, and once you have it, you wish for the other thing. So basically, you already have what you would wish for if you were a god. So it's really a little bit futile to wish for a rebirth as a god. It's much better to direct the merit to making progress on the Dhamma path, because once you are God, then you will wish to become a human being. So we always want what we don't have. So it is human existence that the gods reckon to be going to a good place. And when a human being gains faith in the teaching and training proclaimed by the realized one, that is what the gods reckon to be blessed with good fortune. So again, the second wish or the second aspiration is again something that we already have. So I'm assuming you're listening to this talk because at least you're somewhat interested in Buddhism. Whether you would say that you have faith in the teachings or just developing faith in the teachings or just developing an interest in the teachings, at least you're in contact with the Dhamma. So this second aspiration is again something that you already have. So you're actually more advanced than the gods in the God realms. You're actually in a better place, in a more fortunate place than them. And then the third one is when that faith in the realized one is settled, rooted and planted deep, when it's strong and can't be shifted by any ascetic or Brahmin, or God or Mara or Brahma, or by anyone in the world. That is what the gods reckon to become well-grounded. That is what the Buddha said. So this third description, having faith that is settled, that is strong and cannot be shifted by anyone in the world, that usually refers to stream entry. So no longer having any kind of doubt about the Buddha's teaching and having unshakable faith in the Buddha. That is stream entry. And I'm kind of assuming that many people in the audience won't be stream enterers yet, but you have like the best conditions for stream entry in this particular life. You are already a human being. You have already found the Dhamma. So you're much better off than those gods in those God realms that aspire to having what you already have. So I think this sutta is extremely interesting for this special reason, because it sort of shows us the fortunate conditions that we're already in, actually more fortunate than many of the gods. Like many of the gods would like to be in the conditions that you are in at the moment. So I think this sutta really is showing us that we shouldn't waste time wishing for heavenly rebirth. We should actually direct the merit that we are making now towards making progress on the path and rejoicing in the good fortune that we have already here in this life that we are living now. And this sutta is also so beautiful and so important because as I mentioned, it doesn't have a parallel anywhere else in any of the other early texts or collections of texts. That's why it's so unique, and that's why I also I think we should feel so much gratitude for Khujjuttara for giving us this beautiful sutta. And it seems that at some point this became also quite popular among the monks. As I mentioned, she passed it on to the monks, so the monks knew it at some point. And in somewhat later, a little bit later literature, so maybe a few centuries later than the earliest text, there are parallels in those later texts, especially in a text called the Thera Appadana. So these are legends about the monks of old. And there are two Thera Appadanas, two legends that make references to this sutta and that have extensive quotes of this sutta. So it does seem that the sutta became popular at some point among the monks as well. But in the early texts, there is no parallel. We only have this because Khujjuttara preserved it for us. And now I want to read another little sutta. Oh, I should have mentioned this sutta we just read 83. It also has verses at the end, quite a few verses. And I'm skipping them because I want to read another sutta with you, and I'm conscious of time, so I just want to have enough time for this other sutta as well. So we're skipping those verses. And the other sutta we are reading is Itivuttaka 91. Again, there is a link in the usual places. And this sutta is called Lifestyle, the Jivika Sutta. And this sutta also has no parallel anywhere else. And the sutta begins. This was said by the Buddha, the perfected one. That is what I heard. So again, we see this unusual opening that is only found in the Itivuttaka. And he says, mendicants, this relying on alms is an extreme lifestyle. The world curses you, you beggar, walking bowl in hand. Yet earnest gentlemen take it up for a good reason. Not because they've been forced to by kings or bandits, or because they're in debt or threatened, or to earn a living. Rather because they think, I'm swamped by rebirth, old age and death, by sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. I'm swamped by suffering, mired in suffering. Hopefully I can find an end to this entire mass of suffering. So this is, again, a very unusual beginning. The Buddha says, this relying on alms is an extreme lifestyle. So this is Bhante Sujato's translation. In other translations, for example, Ajahn Thanissaro's translation, the Buddha says, this is a low form of livelihood. And that's so unusual because normally what the Buddha says is going forth, living the holy life is the best thing you can do with your life. This is the highest possible thing you can do with your life. And if you disrobe and you go back to lay life, that is considered going back to the low life. So the usual stop passage for somebody who contemplates disrobing and going back to lay life is they think, oh, I haven't really accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. I'm not an arahant. So let me then disavow the training, return to the low life, enjoy my life, and make merit. That is the usual description of disrobing and going back to lay life. So to describe the monastic life as the extreme lifestyle or as the low form of livelihood is sort of subverting our expectations of what the Buddha should be teaching. And this is obviously a popular teaching device of the Buddha to capture the attention of the audience because it's unusual, and then people are more likely to listen. But it is true. It's true that the world, like as it says here, the world curses you, you beggar, walking bowl in hand. It's true that this is a very, very common perception, especially in countries that are not traditionally Buddhist, but even in countries that are traditionally Buddhist, this can happen. That people think that you're just, as a monastic, you're a parasite on society, you don't contribute, you're not making money, you're not participating in the economic circle. So your life is basically worthless. That's a very, very common perception of monastic life. So the Buddha isn't wrong when he addresses this. It's just that usually we think this is obviously a wrong view. It's not just we think this is a wrong view, this is an actual wrong view. But by the Buddha addressing this, that makes the sutta so unique and so unusual. And the Buddha says, even though this happens to you, you will be cursed and you will be looked down upon, and people won't understand what you're doing as a monastic. Still, monastics voluntarily do this, and we do this with a wise reflection. We don't do this because we're forced to. We don't do this because we want to escape from kings or from our debt, or because somebody's threatening us, or because we can't earn money otherwise, we can't survive otherwise, so we have to go forth and be fed by the lay people. So this is not the reason why anyone goes forth. It's because monastics reflect properly. They have the wisdom to see this whole cycle of samsara and all the suffering that goes on in it, and with the aspiration to make an end to this whole suffering and this round of rebirth. So reflecting wisely, they take this step, even though it has some unpleasant consequences as well, being looked down upon by the world. And then the Buddha continues, that's how this gentleman has gone forth. Yet they covet sensual pleasures, they are infatuated, full of ill will and malicious intent. They are unmindful, lacking situational awareness and immersion. Immersion is samadhi. With a straying mind and undisciplined faculties. Suppose there was a firebrand for lighting a funeral pyre, burning at both ends and smeared with dung in the middle. It couldn't be used as timber either in the village or the wilderness. I say that person is just like this. They've missed out on the pleasures of the lay life and haven't fulfilled the goal of the ascetic life. That is what the Buddha said. So here the Buddha describes somebody who goes forth full of faith with the proper reflection for the proper reasons in order to attain arahantship and make an end of suffering. But once they have gone forth, they lose that motivation and they get distracted, and they start to crave for the sensual pleasures that they have given up, and they are full of ill will because they can't get them, and then they are unmindful and they don't attain samadhi, and they are somewhat undisciplined in their mind is all over the place. So this can happen. I mean, the mind is very changing. At some moment you're fully inspired to do whatever it takes to attain arahantship, and then a little while later you have lost your focus and you're overwhelmed with your defilements, and you just crave for the pleasures that you no longer have. And the Buddha says this is like this log that is burning on both ends and is smeared with dung in the middle. So it's a completely useless log. You can't use it for anything. And if you live your monastic life in this way, that's exactly the same, because you are missing out on the good things you could have in the lay life, those sensual pleasures. So of course they are impermanent and they don't ultimately satisfy you, but temporarily you could feel somewhat good. So you're missing out on those pleasures. On the other hand, you're also missing out on the proper way of living the ascetic life and all the goal, like the joy that could come from that and the attainments that could come from that. So in the end, you have nothing. You neither have a good lay life nor you have a good monastic life. So this is obviously a teaching in order to arouse a sense of urgency in us, and to make sure that we don't waste our monastic life, and that we keep our priorities straight and keep our aspirations intact. And we know why we are living this life and why we are practicing Dhamma, whether we are lay people or monastics, why we are practicing Dhamma. So again, I think this is a very important sutta, one that doesn't have a parallel. And I like this sutta very much because it has this very unusual beginning. And it really captures the attention when you start the sutta in this way. So the sutta also has a few verses at the end, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to talk about those verses at this point. And I'm going to end my talk for today. So to recap, we talked about Khujjuttara this morning. She was a very outstanding lay person. She had very, very profound wisdom. She was able to attain stream entry on the spot when she heard the Dhamma. the first time in her life. And then she was able to help 500 women attain stream entry and even higher stages on the path. And then she preserved an entire collection of suttas for posterity that would be lost if not for her, because she had this outstanding memory. So by reflecting on her, I hope you feel that this is a little bit inspiring. And as the Buddha said, we should try to become like those outstanding people that he mentioned in the sutta for lay women, that is Khujjuttara or Nandamata, who we are talking about this evening. And if you think there are any qualities that are very inspiring in her that you're maybe lacking a little bit, then you know, it's a good idea to slowly start developing in the qualities that you think that are inspiring, but you haven't fully developed to the same extent as Khujjuttara yet. So I hope you enjoyed looking into Khujjuttara a little bit more this morning. And if you have any questions or comments, then please type them in the chat and I will see if I can answer them. So Buddha Ruchi says, Dogen Zenji wrote, once the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were just like us. One day we will be like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Talking about role models. Yeah, that's a good reflection. As I mentioned, we should study them more, both the persons who are living nowadays that we can actually interact with, and we can actually, you know, in real life get inspiration, but also the people of old who lived around the Buddha, and we can see how they lived their life, and hopefully gain a little bit of inspiration there as well. And Melissa says, yes, please, for LGBTQT stories. Okay. So if I get a time slot at some point on the channel, then I will give a teaching about that genderqueer nun. And we can look at her biography together and see how she lived her life. I think it's very inspiring. And Melissa also says, disabilities are very humbling. Scars are humbling, and I believe my injuries help me on my path to not get attached to physical attributes. Yeah, so disabilities and also illnesses are often considered a divine messenger, because they show us that not everything in life is beautiful. There is a lot of suffering. So if we can perceive suffering, then we have a much stronger inspiration to practice the path. They give us energy to actually develop on the path, because they give us insights, they give us wisdom into the nature of samsara, and then that's very, very helpful to not lose focus and to not get distracted, and to actually practice the Dhamma. And so P. Gurgles, the Grillo, says, it's great to see you, Vimalanyani. Yes, nice to see you too. Your foremost series of old series has been truly wonderful. I'm so glad you enjoy it. Yes, I think it's very important to talk more about the female side of things, because the suttas have a very, very strongly male perspective. We have thousands and thousands of suttas, but we have less than 20 where women, where bhikkhunis play any kind of prominent role. Except for the Therigatha poems, which is an entire collection of poems by bhikkhunis, but in the suttas themselves, women have a very small role only, but I think it's very, very important to have a better gender balance. If you just focus on one side, the Dhamma can get very strongly out of balance. So I think it's very important to just take all sides into account and have a good balance between genders, between ages, between whatever physical attributes that you could have, so that, especially now talking about role models, so that everybody can feel included and everybody can see that there is a role model for them as well. So whether that is based on gender, or based on skin color, or based on age, or based on mental abilities, or based on disabilities, or health, or whatever. I think it's very important to show that the early Sangha was an extremely diverse group, and we should, and modern practitioners also are an extremely diverse group, and we should really make sure that we acknowledge that, and that everybody can find role models that are similar to them. And they also say, question, besides nurturing spiritual friends, what other advice would you give to your preordained younger self? Well, I think the most important thing is to be very clear about the priorities in your life. Once you have the priorities clear and you set, your mind in a specific direction, the rest will come together. But if you don't have your priorities clear and you're very distracted and constantly torn in so many different directions, then your life will actually lack direction, because you're just pushed around by your defilements. So the most important thing is to have your priorities clear. If you have your priorities clear, then you can, and you know that Dhamma is important to you, then you will spend your time in that way. When you have free time, you're not going to waste it away with like random other stuff. You're actually going to seek out those practitioners, or you're actually spending time doing Dhamma practice. And you're going to associate with good people, and you're going to go to monasteries. And once you go to monasteries, then you have more opportunities to practice Dhamma, and then your mind inclines that way. And then you start to think, oh, maybe I could become a monastic, and your mind inclines even more towards Dhamma. So by being focused on what is important in your life, I think that is the most important advice I can give. And once you focus in the right direction, all the other conditions will come together, because you will put them into place by going to the right places, by meeting the right people, and so reinforcing the good tendencies in your mind in that way. So for me, I think that was the most important realization, or the most important advice that I could give. And Kumu says, imagine living during Buddha's time with so many hundreds and thousands of stream enters and other higher states. Yeah, that would be really great. Having a Sangha that is so full of arahants, and like where you just have arahants around all the time, whether the Buddha is there or not, other monks and nuns will be there and will be available for teaching. And so many arahants and other and people on the other stages of the noble attainments. So yeah, that would be wonderful. Unfortunately, it seems that we didn't have the good karma to be reborn back then, or we were actually reborn back then and still didn't make it, which is maybe even more depressing. But anyway, we have come in contact with the Dhamma now, so let's not waste this precious opportunity this time. And Dhammajiva says, Venerable, perhaps one day you could go over Majjhima Nikaya 44, which is an incredible sutta that is taught by Bhikkhuni Dhammadina. It is truly a very special sutta. Yes, that is true, and it was also very popular, not only among the nuns, but also among monks and lay people. Maybe tomorrow, when we talk about Chitta the householder, we will see that, how it was popular among all groups of people, of Buddhist practitioners. For people who don't know, Majjhima Nikaya 44, the Chula Vedala Sutta, is a sutta given as I mentioned by Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, and Bhikkhuni Dhammadina is the one foremost in teaching Dhamma. And she gives this sutta to a layman, and the layman, according to the story, the layman is her former husband, and the former husband doesn't really believe that she has these higher attainments, and so the former husband, he himself is a lay person, but he is an anagami, a non-returner. So he goes there and he wants to test her, but she's actually an arahant, so she's able to answer all his questions and even more than that. And they go into some very specific details and about very high stages on the path. So it is a very, very profound sutta. So yeah, maybe one day we can talk about that together. It is definitely a very, very special, very unusual sutta also, and very, very profound. And Kum says, yes, his name is Visakha. Yes, that is true. His name is Visakha. The husband, the layman, who is an anagami, a non-returner, his name was Visakha. Just now I didn't remember, but yeah, that's true. So yeah, maybe one day we can talk about that sutta as well. And that is the last comment or question for today, it seems. So I think we can end for today. If you want to come back this evening for the second role model for the laywomen, which is Velukantaki Nandamata from the town called Velukanta. And otherwise, have a good day, and we will end today with 3 sadhus, and feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you all this evening.